Hey guys, EvanNova95 here, coming at you with another Star Wars discussion video. While there are many philosophical and spiritual beliefs that separate the Jedi Knights from the Sith Lords, the most prominent visual distinction between the two organizations is the Jedi's use of an entire spectrum of colors for their lightsabers, as opposed to the almost universal usage of red for the Sith. As I mentioned in my previous video, which I strongly recommend you watch before proceeding with this one if you haven't done so yet, the reason for this distinction was that red crystals, be they natural or synthetic, glowed in harmonic vibration when energized by the dark side of the Force, making them the perfect weapon for the Dark Organization. While Jedi lightsabers were generally less powerful than their crimson cousins, they were also considered to be far more stable, being significantly less prone to mechanical malfunctions and possessed of a greater all-around degree of maneuverability in combat. However, despite the red lightsabers' association with the Sith, and George Lucas's assertions to the contrary, there have been a handful of Jedi over the generations who have utilized these weapons. And today we will be diving into the majority of these characters and assessing whether or not their choice of saber color aligned with their characters. Now, while scripting discussions fully is all fine and good, given my desire to keep these two videos consistent with each other, I have decided to follow the route I took with my Sith who do not use red lightsabers video and make the rest of this an unscripted, free-flowing fireside chat. However, as I made abundantly clear in that video, fireside chats are rather difficult to make without another creature to bounce off of, so I have gone and acquired another creature. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, my friend, Jensarai1.
Hello, YouTube.
Alright man, are you ready for part 2 of this duology?
Ooh, so looking forward. Let's talk about these scary, secretly evil Jedi, because we all know they're secretly evil. Look at their shifty eyes and red lightsabers.
But of course. Okay, well, with that out of the way, let's get started. Kicking off our list in the quote-unquote Republic Golden Age, we have the trio of Jedi Masters Adi Gallia, Evan Peel, and Deepa Billaba, who most notably wielded red blades in the Jedi Power Battles video game, the comic Jedi Council Acts of War, as well as the comic Emissaries and Assassins.
Now, these individuals were one of the most notable instances of, well, some of the most notable instances of characters with alternative lightsaber colors being retconned to blue and green by Attack of the Clones, because George Lucas mandated the Jedi didn't carry red lightsabers, and went a step further by making
that.
Yeah. However, my position on the matter has actually really changed. I was doing some research in preparation for this video specifically on dual-phase lightsabers, and one of the things talked about in the Jedi Academy training manual specifically is that not all people who use dual-phase lightsabers are going for the Exar Kun setup where it's changing between different blade lengths. Sometimes they just want to swap out crystals to change the functionality of their weapon. And further research, specifically into the guidebook Lightsabers, A Guide to Weapons of the Force, gives examples of Jedi in the films who did this. We had Ki-Adi-Mundi, whose lightsaber switches from blue to green in Attack of the Clones during the arena battle. And
Blink and you'll miss it. Yeah,
and I think presumably saying that he's got a third purple crystal in there is not that big a deal. And then we've got Aegon Kolar, whose lightsaber changed from green to blue between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. The lightsaber guidebook specified that both of them do use multiple crystals interchangeably. And I actually think that that's probably the case with all of these individuals, because another thing I realized is just because Ilum crystals are universal and are used by everyone doesn't mean that other crystals are excluded from use. You know, you could have one Ilum crystal and two Adegan crystals that you picked up later.
Yeah, and that's a aspect of characterization that goes all the way back to KOTOR with the Dantooine crystal chamber.
Yes, it's discussed that dual-phase lightsabers used to be much more common than they are, yet we don't have too many examples of Jedi with the Exar Kun setup, so it occurs to me that the majority of people who go for dual-phase lightsabers are just switching between different color crystals, you know, to change their lightsabers' handling.
I like that. And going from a purely mechanical explanation to a more character-based one, I feel like you can make a lot of interesting arguments with these three characters specifically and how a red blade fits them. For instance, what does a red blade typically represent? Well, it represents anger, strength, control for the Sith. So the question then becomes, how would you take those elements and apply it to Jedi philosophy? And for me, with these characters, three characters specifically, I feel like you could come to a lot of interesting conclusions, which, for example, you have Adi Gallia. What is she most well known for? Well, she's one of the Jedi Council's top negotiators and one of their most fearsome warriors, at least at that time.
She's a confirmed Shien specialist, so Form 5.
Exactly, and what does that represent? Well, it can be inferred that she's more willing to take certain risks and more willing to use intimidation as a weapon in order to serve the greater good. Similarly, Evan Peel.
Firepower.
Exactly, Peace through superior firepower, the Form 5 monicum. Now, for Evan Peel, you get something similar. He's noted to be very gruff, a very strict warrior who values justice above all else. Well, what does that represent? Well, he is probably more willing to take certain risks in combat in order to serve the greater good. And again, with Deepa Billaba, you have something sort of similar. However, who was her master? Mace Windu.
What happened to Deepa? Fell to the dark side in Shatterpoint. So again, explicitly confirmed to be a Form 7 specialist, someone who's been flirting with the dark side all her life, because that's what happens when you practice Form 7. So yeah, red crystal. The other thing to remember is that not all red crystals are necessarily Sith-style synthetics. Naturally occurring red Adegan crystals are a thing. Darth Vader used one at the end of his career. So, yeah, you can find yourself a red blade without it being a Sith blade.
Exactly. It's not like the red crystals themselves are inherently evil. It's stated that they work well when energized by the dark side. That just means that they can function well under those circumstances. It doesn't mean they are inherently a malicious force.
Yes. Next on our list, another Jedi from that time period is Ayla Sakura, who wielded a red lightsaber in the Darkness arc. Now,
as well as in flashbacks for the Stark Hyperspace War.
Yes. Now, this is another case where she is a subject of the retcon, but it's something I'm willing to take at face value specifically because of the events of the Darkness arc, where she's actually conscripted as an apprentice by a super powerful Dark Jedi, and I imagine that after that event, she deliberately changed out her crystal in order to distance herself from the dark side because, well, once is a bit much.
Yeah, that definitely is a possibility, especially considering all the trauma that she went through and how her mind was so deeply invaded by Volfate during those events.
Yep, so she's basically just trying to put the dark side thing behind her, and who wants a reminder of a red lightsaber waving in front of your face every single time you turn your own weapon on?
Granted, I do think the red blade, especially when you consider her early years, really does fit, especially when you consider the fact that Quinlan Vos very specifically trained her to operate from the shadows and be more willing to use more unorthodox techniques in order to get information, which can be considered somewhat Sith-leaning, if not outright Sith practice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the other thing I like about Ayla switching out her crystal from red to blue is that it basically creates a direct reversal of what Quinlan Vos did during the Clone Wars in the Jedi Count Dooku comic, where he replaced his green Jedi crystal with not only a red synthetic crystal, but the red synthetic crystal of Darth Andedu.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting little factor to consider, but I really like the fact that it actually makes the whole journey between these two characters in the series to be an almost perfect parallel to each other. For example, you have Quinlan Vos, who is trying to get Ayla to return to the light, and then later on, you have the reverse. You have Ayla Sakura trying to be Quinlan Vos's guiding light back to the Jedi. Moving on, we have two characters we actually covered somewhat in our previous video, the father-son duo of Jedi Master Ashurad Het and Ashurad Het, who were depicted wielding red blades in the Outlander comics, though this was, unfortunately retconned later on by the Kenobi novel.
Yeah. In the case of Ashurad Het, his lightsaber color basically just changed when the Clone Wars time frame started because of the Attack of the Clones retcon, but Ashurad Het wielding a red lightsaber was actually specifically shot down by the Kenobi novel by John Jackson Miller, with the books explicitly stating that he carried a green lightsaber. I have to admit, this is something I prefer to ignore, because the image of the image of the Hets as, you know, the Tusken Jedi with red lightsabers is kind of hard to let go.
Much more intimidating, to be sure.
Oh yeah. Especially given how within the story itself, it allowed the story to build a false expectation as to whether or not these guys are lightsiders or darksiders.
And I always thought it really just made sense for the sake of the story, because even if you want to argue that Ashurad Het constructed his lightsaber the traditional way from Ilum, like all Jedi, a lot of people forget Ashurad Het was raised on Tatooine in the desert. You know, the crystals he's going to be able to have access to is going to be very limited. So I think it's highly likely that he just, you know, him and his father just fashioned some synthetic crystals that just turned out to be red.
Yeah, because it is established, again, in the Jedi Academy training manual that while you can fabricate synthetic crystals in a different color, it calls for actively adjusting and changing the crystal formation process. Default synth crystals, at least how they're made within the Star Wars setting, are always going to be red unless you take steps to make it otherwise.
This is especially considering the fact that a Tusken tribe that's always on the move isn't exactly going to have access to the most advanced technology out there, even in this universe.
And another idea to consider is that even if he's not using a synthetic crystal, he's probably using local crystals that could be obtained on Tatooine, and the idea of those being rubies, I'd say, you know, it's not implausible.
Of course not. I mean, there are so many exotic creatures on Tatooine, it's entirely possible that some of them would, you know, fabricate crystals of that nature. But again, even getting more to the point, you know, as far as how it affects their character, again, like we've said, it makes them more intimidating, it builds up a sense of mystery with the story itself, and, you know, makes the story of, you know, Ashurad Het more specifically kind of symmetrical in a way. Started off with red, moved to green when he became a Jedi, but then defaulted back to red again when he became a Sith Lord. Again, this is something we kind of touched on in our previous videos, so we won't really dwell on it too much here. But again, when you take in the entire context of the story, it just makes the whole thing flow a lot more naturally. And moving on to his father, even though you don't exactly have the whole dark side argument, you can definitely look at him as a character and think, well, this is someone who's not entirely good or entirely evil. He is embracing the Tusken lifestyle, which, you know, strongly emphasizes savagery. So why not? Why would he not be, you know, pushed between worlds?
Indeed. And the other thing is that even the inconsistency of the colors could, again, just be retconned away by saying that, again, they carry dual-phase lightsabers and they're switching between crystals. And one thing I will say about dual-phase lightsabers, it's like so many people are caught up in the radical changes in blade length that they allow that no one's really considering the subtle changes in blade performance that you just get from switching out crystals, and that's all you're doing.
Definitely. Also, this is completely unrelated, but a minor point. I feel like we should point this out because no one else has on video before. Ashurad Het is one of only 2 Jedi in the entire Star Wars universe whose merchandise has also included his red lightsaber, the other being Adi Gallia, who we already covered. So that's a nice little fun fact.
Coolio.
Now, moving on from a character who's really cool to a character that really isn't cool at all, we have the Jedi Padawan Chun, who was Obi-Wan Kenobi's rival in the Jedi Apprentice series and who carried a red blade.
Basically the Star Wars settings analog to Draco Malfoy. As to where
I was about to say, classic bully character. That's really all you can say about him.
Yes. But as to his lightsaber color, it's something that initially confused me, but then once I did my research, it's not nearly as daft as it sounds, because training lightsabers still use Adegan cathracites in that era. So it's still Adegan crystals, which can come in any color. So training lightsabers, even though you don't see it in Attack of the Clones in the one scene, training lightsabers still come in the rainbow myriad of colors. I guess it's really just the proper lightsabers carried by Jedi Knights where the blue and green as exclusives rule applies, because they're all using Ilum crystals.
I would definitely say it's possible, and there are cases where Jedi Padawans are using red lightsabers in the new Jedi Order era, so it's not like there's not a precedence for it. However, as far as character goes, I feel like this one's probably the most basic out of all of them. I feel like when they were designing this character, the writers were probably thinking, okay, we need an antagonist for Obi-Wan. What kind of lightsaber should he have? And someone was probably saying, well, he's a bad guy, right? So let's give him a red one. So, obviously there's more to it than that, but I feel like this is probably the most basic. He's probably the most basic example of, bad guy equals red on this list.
Yep. And as for the lightsaber he was wielding as Xanatos' apprentice when he actually did fall to the dark side, in that case, I think it was probably just a dark side crystal provided by Xanatos.
Who himself actually did wield a red lightsaber after he did fall to the dark side, so it's definitely possible.
Yeah. Red lightsabers, I find the main reason for where they come from is it's people not having access to the traditional sites that Jedi go to get their crystals, so they make synthetic crystals as an analog, and because of that, red lightsabers become very common because most people who make synthetic crystals are darksiders, but that doesn't mean that all synthetic crystals are dark side.
Exactly, it's the wielder, not the weapon itself. There's, as we've said before, there's nothing inherently wicked about red crystals. It's what you do with them and how they're treated.
The next person on our list is another Jedi Padawan, the one who did not self-destruct and become a Darksider, Ferris Olin, who is depicted wielding a red lightsaber in the first Jedi Quest book.
And only the first Jedi Quest book. I'm sure a few people are probably raising some eyebrow him being on this list because most people don't think of him with a red blade, especially considering that there actually exists no illustrations or pictures of him actually wielding a red blade. He is most commonly depicted with a blue blade, though there is at least one or two instances where he's shown wielding a green blade. That being said, in the very first Jedi Quest book, he is very specifically described as wielding a red blade, which is very interesting.
Is it confirmed within the book, because I don't rightly remember, whether or not he was carrying a training lightsaber or if it was his own? Because if it's a training lightsaber, then chances are it's just got a red cathracite, and that's that.
I don't believe so, but I would wager that it's not, especially considering the fact that Anakin, who's on roughly the same level as Ferris, did have his lightsaber by then. So I would say it is the one he constructed himself. Obviously, from a real world standpoint, this was just retconned later on, and people just kind of tried to forget about it when they were showing illustrations of Ferris later on. But more to the point, I feel like from a character standpoint, again, I don't feel like a red blade really fits Ferris as a character. However, I do feel like you could sort of make the argument that he was very specifically intended to be a rival to Anakin and sort of an analog for what Anakin could be. And I feel like from a story perspective, you could sort of say, okay, he started off with the red blade and Anakin started off with the blue blade, but by the end of their journey, it was him with the blue blade and Anakin as Vader with the red blade. So there is a little bit of parallel you can make with that, but I really don't think that was intentional by the authors.
I think at this point it's something that would be better written off as an inconsistency because, well, even if you were doing a full versus video analysis like we do, what's the lightsaber he's carrying at the end of his career? That's the lightsaber we would have him using.
Exactly, and which was blue. In fact, there's even a story arc in the last of the Jedi novels where he reconstructs his lightsaber, and he is very specifically shown acquiring blue crystals from Ilum. Moving on, we have a personal favorite character of mine, the Jedi Master of the New Jedi Order, Saba, who was originally depicted wielding a red lightsaber in the Heretic novels, though this was later retconned by the Fate of the Jedi series, which depicts her with a purple blade.
Again, this is another example of a Jedi. I think it's more likely that, again, either a dual-phase lightsaber or she just recalibrated her lightsaber, because another thing that I think is worth considering is what sort of blade color will emerge based on which crystal is being used as your primary crystal versus which is being used as your focusing crystal. And if you switch them out, you're obviously going to get a different color.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely possible. And from a character standpoint, I feel like a red blade does suit Saba in certain ways. Her being very animalistic, very primal, very instinct-driven, can definitely, it's kind of like the Adi Gallia, Evan Peel, Deepa Balava argument, where you could sort of twist the typical ideology that's associated with the red blade and integrate that into Jedi philosophy. which in many ways I feel like is what Saba does all the time. In fact, I would even argue that her purple blade also kind of fits this mold, mainly because purple blade users, although this isn't confirmed obviously, are usually beings who kind of toe the line between the light side and the dark side, which she most certainly does. So whatever color you associate with her, I think both fit her character very nicely.
Thing is that even ignoring all of the subtext about light side, dark side interactions, the New Jedi Order does not have any institutionalized objections to the use of synthetic crystals. They use them all the time because they were having to reconstruct in the post-Imperial era when places like Ilum and the Adegan system were blockaded, razed, or Luke simply didn't know about them.
Exactly, so you had to make do with what you had.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us to Luke Skywalker himself, specifically the Shoto lightsaber that he brandished in the Marvel Star Wars comic Duel with the Dark Lady. In this case, I think it's pretty clear where the crystal came from. It was just a rushed synth crystal because he didn't have time to adjust the forging process to produce a different color, so it was red because he needed to make the Shoto right away for his engagement with Lumaya.
Definitely, both practical and mechanical purposes. Though it is interesting that the main character of the entire Star Wars series has, when you really think about it, wielded almost every single color available.
At different times, yes.
As far as how the red blade fits Luke, well, again, like we've said, it's a very practical decision on his part, and in fact, he even kept the Shoto his entire life. In Legacy of the Force, he even gives it to Mara in order to aid in her hunt for Lumaya herself. So we can see that he has no qualms about using the weapon, and he doesn't feel that it's an inherently malicious force despite its color.
There you go.
Last but not least, we have Luke Skywalker's sister, the lovely Leia Organa Solo, who wielded a red lightsaber in the early New Jedi Order era. This was actually the second lightsaber she was ever depicted wielding, the first being the green blade that she wielded in the Thrawn trilogy, though this red blade in particular was actually constructed by Luke in order to help her training. However, that being said, she did not keep this blade her entire life, instead later constructing a blue blade when she finally decided to commit to being a Jedi.
As for where the red blade came from, again, I think it's likely that Luke just defaulted to using a synthetic crystal when constructing it for her. And if this lightsaber was constructed with the explicit purpose of just being an interim training lightsaber that just happened to be full strength so it could be used, then I could understand him not being willing to put the effort into making a full-on light-side attuned synth crystal that wasn't red. He's literally just making a stand-in lightsaber for Leia to putz around with now before making a proper weapon down the road.
Exactly, and just as you'd expect that pragmatic mindset to work out, Leia does not view her weapon with any sort of disdain or any sort of fear due to its color. She just views it as, okay, this is my weapon, this is what I'm going to train with, this is what I'm going to use in order to incite justice. Again, a very practical mindset, very befitting of Leia's character.
And in general, that's the unifying theme behind all of the Jedi who wield red lightsabers. These are the Jedi who, even if they're not necessarily willing to compromise their morals, they're a lot more pragmatic in their approach to things. They're less blinded by their own ideology.
Exactly. They're more willing to sort of expand their viewpoint and explore different, facets of Jedi and Sith ideology in order to make their own decisions.
In a lot of ways, a Jedi adopting a red synthetic crystal is almost an acknowledgement that the Sith do have some valid points. Some,
not many, but some, to be sure. All in all, unlike our Sith who don't use red lightsabers video, where the reasons for these Sith to use these weapons vary depending on their character, motivation, and era in which they lived, all the Jedi on this list seem to have a general unifying theme in regards to their choice of weaponry.
That theme being pragmatism. There's no deeper symbolism behind their choice for a red lightsaber. They're not doing it to taunt the Sith. It's just making a practical choice and picking a red crystal, because sometimes red crystals are more practical. There are situations where the greater cutting power of a red synthetic crystal, I think, would be beneficial. And moreover, if you find an excellent Adegan crystal that just happens to be red, who cares if it's red? It's a great crystal for your lightsaber. Throw her in.
And I like that because I feel like you can take that idea and spin it in a lot of interesting ways. Whereas you look at the Sith in our previous video and see that they chose these weapons as either a way of mocking their enemies or making them more efficient killers, the Jedi have chosen these weapons in order to make them better peacekeepers and in turn make them more pragmatic. The Sith followed the path of emotion, whereas the Jedi follow the path of detachment and practicality.
The Jedi are designing their weapons for usability and ergonomics. The Sith are designing their weapons for lethality.
Once again, it all comes back to ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed our dive Jedi who wield red lightsabers. If you enjoyed this and have any suggestions for future Star Wars discussion videos, let us know in the comment section below. Thank you to Jensarai1 for joining me for this discussion. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and we'll see you guys later.
Jensarai1 signing off.